Art history, who cares?
I do.
I can sometimes, maybe a little bit. I'm going to start this off.
Sure.
Because I was the one who introduced the topic.
You're very opinionated about it.
Well, I guess.
Well, you're opinionated about everything. I guess we both are.
Yeah.
I know, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to start it off because I'm excited about it and because I had the idea for it, I guess, and just was like, yeah, explaining it would be cool if I could actually get to the point where I do that. That'd be nice. So this kind of gets rooted back to university for me because I started. So quick recap as to how my whole thing went. I started really thinking about art when I was doing graffiti. So it was after high school where I started to realize like this is like artistic a little bit and start making abstract paintings right before I went into university, into the art program. I started making abstracts without even knowing what they were. So I was doing graffiti before I knew what graffiti was too. So like my visual art beginnings were very uninformed, very ignorant, innocent, uninspired by other things, I would say, consciously. It wasn't like a lot of taught stuff. Like, despite what I had in high school, I wasn't doing that kind of stuff. I wasn't doing still lifes and grid portraits. I didn't even know what an abstract painting was, and I was doing abstract paintings, like, right after I stopped doing illegal graffiti. And I was in high school playing around with letters before I knew what graffiti was. So I feel like that's kind of a trend that happened until university. And then, in order to do a BFA, my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, I had to take some art history. And I was at the same time, like right before then, already making some work, and I just didn't care about. I felt like the stuff I was learning about, I didn't understand why I was learning about it when it was like general art history, like 101 type stuff. We just looked at slides. It wasn't helping me create the work I was doing. I didn't understand the purpose in knowing what these other people did because I was making work based off of my personal experiences and the things that I was processing throughout the day and the week and the month and the year. So that's kind of where this started for me, where I was like, who cares? Like, really? Like, this isn't helping me. It's not doing it. I'm not getting anything from learning about art history. So that's I don't know. I don't know if you want to jump from there.
Well, yeah, I guess because it sort of surprises me, and probably you did get more out of it than you thought, unless you were being sort of consciously like stubborn about it. But I mean, just by watching and at least my history 101, I'm going to call it. It's not what it was called, but I mean, just like a general sort of overview. For me, it was like, oh, okay, and like sort of the different. I mean, I guess like I like researching anyway, so I guess I like that aspect of it. But also, it was sort of like there was a reason that something was a plain blue field painting. Like all of a sudden, I got like a deeper appreciation for things that I didn't know before. And I guess that's one of the things that education does for us, right? We get a better impression, or I mean, understanding for things that didn't really make sense before.
Yeah.
Or at least we try and unpack that and make sense out of the world. So I don't know, for me it was inspiring. The part that I didn't like is when then I got creating. I wasn't trying to emulate this person, or that person, but then when I'd finish a project, then a professor would come up and go, oh, have you seen, Mary Kelly? Because that's just, and I was like, oh, frick. And that just kept happening all the time. And so then I learned to accept it and that kind of thing. But it's like, everything everybody's done before. And that's where art history, it wasn't frustrating, for sure it wasn't frustrating. I don't mean that, but it was I guess it was frustrating, yeah. Because everything that I was trying to do, all of a sudden, even though it was original to me, it wasn't original. And it kind of took some wind out of my sails like a few times,
Yeah.
And so it was almost like, why does everything that we have to do need to be compared to something that's been done before?
Yeah.
And so that's where it got frustrating for me. But things like Warhol that I was almost like stubbornly not going to like him just because everybody does, and that's my shtick. But then when I got to know what he was doing and find all the little things that you don't really understand, right? Just by looking at a Campbell soup thing, you don't understand that context without the history of it and without learning why that happened and how it happened. And then by knowing that, you can take that, and by you I just mean whoever, can take that idea or the unidea really, and use that in your art. So I think sometimes art history can be, for me, a bit stifling, and then other times it really helps explain what's going on. So for me, just like as a visual audience, I enjoy knowing what's going on and what's happening and that kind of thing. And then other times it's just interesting. I had 3 when I started. Now I only have 2. I don't know where the other one went. But I guess I either go from being frustrated or inspired.
Yeah.
Meh. I guess that's what I basically want to say.
Okay. You said a whole bunch there. No. You said like a whole bunch that I was like, oh man, when do I cut in right now? No, it's not that. As long as I just remember to. You mentioned the originality thing, which we need to get back to.
Yeah.
And referencing is another key word that I want to get back to.
Mm-hmm.
Which they're kind of tied together. But I guess one thing I wanted to say, or there's 2 things, and one was, what are you looking at, and then, or who are you looking at, and then the whole thing about the context of like your art history class at the U of L versus my introductory art history class at the U of S could have been vastly different experiences too. My professor was a great professor, I remember her being really enthusiastic and stuff, but the format of my class had a problem. Like I had a problem with that too. It was 3 hours of sitting in a dark room watching slides from 7 p.m. till 10 p.m.
Yeah.
It also, coincidentally, was my busiest day. I had 3 classes that day, and my first class started at 8:30 in the morning. So it was like 8:30 until, I don't even remember, I think it was only a 1-hour class. And then I had like an hour and a half or 2-hour class sometime in the afternoon, and then I had 7 till 10 p.m. So it was just like, it was my longest day by far. I was on campus all day. I fell asleep in that class probably 80% of the time. It was a small lecture hall. There's like 100 people in there packed. And it was just like, I sat at the back and like, we're in the dark, like I said, watching slides. And it just, I couldn't get into it. I didn't feel engaged despite my professor's enthusiasm. It was a lot of looking at this and looking at that and not a lot of discussion, not a lot of like, what do you think? Why is this important? Like, what are, like, it was just a ton of information.
Well,
it was like,
that's kind of what like art history, the first class of art history is, right? I mean, mine was like that too, except I think I was in a room with like 300 people, so there was absolutely no discussion.
Yeah.
Like you say, to be had. It was basically, I forget how long we had, but in the dark looking at slides, basically with some explanation between. So I had very similar experience as you did. But they kind of have to do that with art history, like the first one, right? And then I guess, you kind of just get this like just a smash mouth kind of bit of information. And then it's sort of like everything's sort of like foundations for art, right? You just get this like smack of a whole bunch of little bits that then you can take and make sense later in your other classes. And I think that's how art history is too. It's like this smash of like everything, just like bam, 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 and just giving you all these. And then for other ones, then you could take, okay, postmodern history or, So I know exactly what you're saying for the first one and how it just sort of was kind of a monotonous, not engaging sort of. What about your other art history classes though?
Yeah, so that's what I was going to lead to, is that eventually I got to some more specified areas of art history, and the class sizes were immensely smaller, like sometimes 15, 20 students in high school classrooms are bigger than some of the rooms we were in. But it was good. It was just like postmodernism. That I remember being in that. I don't remember. There was another class I don't remember what I took, and it ended up being the same instructor I had for my intro to art history. But those classes just got. I took a documentary class. I took postmodernism. and I don't remember the other one that I took that was a specific art history that ended up having that other professor in. And so I remember being interested in postmodernism. I remember that I started to get things out of it. And the documentary class was cool. I mean, we just kind of sat around and watched movies a lot, and like, I had to make my own like documentary, but it was not like we had class time for that. But we watched things. We had some discussion. It wasn't like super enlightening, but it was definitely interesting and not boring. Or usually not. I don't know. So yeah, the more specified my classes got, the more interested I became. Like I said, the postmodernism one really stood out to me, and I kind of want to revisit that in a way. But I mean, I understood it to a degree as much as you can understand postmodernism. Like I understood some things, and I liked having reference points of like, oh, this is why this thing, or like, there's at the time, like, man, I don't know what year that was, but I think Lady Gaga was just beginning her career. Their debut album came out sometime around then, possibly, and I didn't like Lady Gaga back then whatsoever, but I remember, like, later on when I did get into Lady Gaga, I was like, oh, I remember now in my postmodernism class, we talked about the Dada movement and stuff, and how, like, that's how she got her name, and that name being a philosophy for her and her music, and like...
No, she got the name from the song. There's a song, something Gaga. What's the song? It's something Gaga. And that's where she got the name. Her manager or guy she was with or something gave her that name, and it was after the song.
I don't know, we talked about how the fact that she was following this Dada movement and having a name like Gaga meaning that same thing of like, this is just nonsensical. This is nonsensical art that still has a purpose and function, and it seemed to perfectly fit with like what she was expressing completely, like stripping things down to that whole infant aspect of just like creating and whatever, and like being nonsensical in a way. I don't know, that's what they talked about, and then I'm like, that completely made sense for what I was getting out of her music at times too. But yeah, so when I did get more specified, the art history thing started to matter a little more, but it didn't really key in until, I don't remember which class it was. It was a different art history class, and I had that same instructor, and then I had to do like a report or something. Like I had to have like a presentation that I had to give on a specific artist, which sounds very high school, but I didn't know. I was like, I don't even know who. Like that's the thing. Like there was no specific figure in art history that appealed to me or that I knew anything about. That I was like, oh yeah, this person. Like sure, I'll do some of that. Like just nothing really stood out to me. And it was her suggestion that I do Pollock. I don't remember why. Maybe it was because we talked about some of my work or something. And that is what really changed things with art history for me a bit. I want to interrupt that thought for a second, because the other thing that I really, really, really disliked, which is similar to your thing in a way, was during classes, like during art classes, not art history, like studio classes.
Critique?
Yeah, well, when we had critiques during our studio classes, it was a professor that kept asking me, who are you looking at? Not me. He asked everybody, who are you looking at? And that pissed me off every single time. Which I think we brought up in another podcast. I don't remember which one. But this is a slightly different context. Was that I was like, I'm not looking at anyone, dude. Like, I'm looking at everyone and not looking at anyone. Like, I read art magazines from time to time. I am not being directly influenced by those, not even subconsciously sometimes. I like reading about process. But I'm not looking at anyone and incorporating that into my work visually. I'm not studying anyone. I'm like, what I'm doing right now is so what I thought original to me at the time. Like, I wasn't looking and then taking it into me and then expressing that in my own way even. Yeah. It was just like, I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just doing it.
Yeah.
So it was just whatever came natural to me. Obviously, we have all these influences from everywhere, which I think we're going to talk about when we talk about originality and stuff. But that question always upset me, and that ties into the whole art history thing, because I was like, I'm not looking at anyone. And I can still make stuff without having to, people have to go and research, and people have to do this and do that, and then very, very systematically, like, put like this book report into a painting or something, and I was like, that's stupid. So you talked before about, you didn't say the word contrarian, but like rebelling or something against stuff, and I feel like it's really natural for me to be, or you said stubborn. It's really natural for me to be a contrarian a lot of the time, and sometimes I don't do it on purpose, but this is one of those instances where I was like, I don't want to be that, so I'm glad I'm not that. So I would revel in the fact that I wasn't like that at all. I didn't have to be that way.
Why do you think that it upset you so much that it was being brought up that you were looking at someone? Because you were tied to the idea of originality?
I think
because postmodern teaches us there is no original, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that I agree with that either, which I'm sure we'll get to. But he asked that of everyone, and we had, I don't know how many people in it was the senior studio class for painting, and like I really like that professor. I still really like him, but like you'd ask that of everyone, and so many people actually had an answer, and I was just like, who are you? Like, why are you looking at it? Like, why do you have to be following in someone else's footsteps and do, like, I just didn't understand it. I liked not being a part of that. Like, whatever I was doing came natural to me. It wasn't because I'm like, oh, I want to be different and I want to, once I saw the fact that I was different in that way, I liked it. So it always upset me because it upset me because I looked weird when I felt like everyone else is like doing something stupid. I was like, why am I the odd one out that looks weird for not knowing how to answer this question? It like makes me look stupid when I can't answer you, because I'm like I don't know, like how do you, like, even when I knew the question was coming, I don't remember how I answered because I wasn't looking at anyone.
Did he then give you people to look at?
Sometimes yes, and I don't think I did. Over half the time, I probably never looked them up. And it wasn't because I'm like, oh, I want to be a purist, I want to keep my, no, I was like, I just don't care right now, dude. Like I didn't.
But it might have, do you think that it might have, by looking at the history or the past work of others, that it would have actually enhanced your practice?
So this is where it jump back into art history again, when I had that one professor, I don't remember the class, where she asked me to do this report, and I was like, I don't even know, and then, because this was around the same time that I was doing right before I started doing my BFA exhibit, so it was this senior painting class where he keeps asking everybody, who are you looking at? And then I was taking another art history class, and I had to do this thing, and she chose Pollock for me, or she suggested Pollock. I was like, hey, whatever, I'll just do it. And then I researched Pollock, and then it's really hard for me to write essays or do any of that because there's research involved, and that's just not the way that I learn, or the way I don't get interested in doing research like that, very formal research. So, but I did do some, and then I came across Clement Greenberg's thoughts on Pollock, more so than Pollock's own words, or watching videos of him and stuff like that. It was more of the critics talking about his process that I got wrapped into, and that was one of the most valuable things I think for my art practice that I can point to. Like, that's one of the most valuable things, other than general things like experiment, don't be bound to rules, like those type of things. Like, but this was a very specific thing where it did change my art practice completely, because I didn't have a direction for a long time. I was just I'm expressing me, and that's it.
So what was it in that
this whole notion of Pollock and the finished product being evidence of art. That was the whole thing. So, and it informed my thesis statement basically for my exhibition. It was like, this is evidence of the action was the most important thing, the process was the most important thing, because that is where I actually laid down my soul for that moment. You're just seeing the evidence of what happened. And then that tied into music and writing and everything. With the visual art pieces, but that, like, I started to collect evidence through photographs of stuff at the studio. That's when I really saw the beauty in things like even just pictures of sometimes like hands or whatever of like paint, and like really this is the evidence of this moment that sometimes I wasn't even there for that moment, and just to see that evidence of someone else's moment was really inspiring. So this whole thing of like evidence of art, the process being like the most important thing, but not in the way like Chuck Close would talk about process. This was more of like I am feeling right now and I am expressing, and this is like, that's abstract expressionism, right? Like, it was like, this is so intense, and that's how I felt about my stuff. I was like, in some of those moments when I was creating like my first 3 or 4, well, like 2 or 3 abstracts before I even got into university, they were some of the most intense feelings I was feeling at that point in time, and I fit them onto an 18 by 24 masonite board. And I just like, had an intense 10 or 15 minutes, and I still remember vividly those pieces. Sometimes even I remember what I was listening to, I remember the materials, I remember working out of the trunk of my car. Like, I felt like sometimes that's like the purest work that I had done in a way. Because it didn't have this academic influence, it didn't have, or history behind it, it didn't have, it was innocent and ignorant in a way that I found beautiful because I didn't know what I was doing and I was just doing it. Mm-hmm. However, that, like, this whole thing with this art history class and then Pollock and doing the research and having to not write an essay but create a presentation, it was invaluable, and that was the first time where I was like, okay, now I understand. Like, when we were discussing this, talking about the topic at all, in Mars, I said, like, this thing goes back and forth with me between original thought and then standing on the shoulder of giants. Mm-hmm. And I definitely don't like the idea of being, like, standing on the shoulder of giants and, like, acknowledging that there's all this history, I'm coming from this school, and I don't like that because then I feel like it devalues me and the thoughts and feelings I'm having and what I'm producing. With the Pollock thing, like, my work doesn't look anything like his, and my feelings certainly, like, I think some things that we thought were important align by coincidence. Like, that's why I ended up, like, I didn't, it wasn't that I got into Pollock and then later I was, like, processing that into my own work, and then that's how I started feeling that way. I felt that way already, and like you said, you were making work that sometimes was like, oh, someone's done this before, and it's like the things that I think I valued were some of the same things he valued, and I found that out later. So, but by learning about him, I was able to understand myself better. I think that is sometimes how art history can be super important, and also the referencing. So this is something, there was a key word from before that I knew I wanted to get back to, is that I already had the importance of, like, I want to reference poetry in my visual art. I want to reference music in my visual art. I never thought about referencing visual art in my visual art. I never thought about, like, you know what I mean? Like, building off of these important artists, these important people, whether it be, like, Duchamp or, like, conceptual art. Like, playing with someone else's idea and then creating your own piece that's either, maybe you're critiquing their art, maybe you're, whatever, social commentary based off of someone else's social commentary. Like, it gets really meta, and there's layers to it, and that's fun to play with. But you can't do that unless you understand it. You can't do that without the knowledge. And that's why, like, I just didn't, like, at the time, like, I was referencing music all the time, and poetry, and books, and movies sometimes, and I was like, oh, this is like a little nugget that if someone knows that line of that song, they'll understand the piece better. I just never did it with visual stuff. Yeah. And then I started to, because I understood, like, in that postmodernism class, I was like, I understand how I can build on this idea now. Like, now that I understand conceptual art, that was a big thing for me too. I was like, conceptual art is the bee's knees. Like I didn't even know what it was. And then all of a sudden I was like, hell yeah. Like, that is so beautiful and wonderful and, like, cheeky and stuff too. I was like, this is great. So that's when I finally got the importance. And I'm still really torn sometimes about this whole subject. But that, it took me that to get to where I can even appreciate it at all.
Well, you certainly don't need art history to be a good artist. Like, you certainly, there's, a lot of artists out there that have never taken any art history or might not even have access to art history, although now you have access to art history kind of everywhere. It's kind of easy to get that. But I mean, there's a lot of artists out there who don't have any art history, so it's not like you need art history to be a good artist. But I think that, I know for me, it absolutely helped my practice, if not sometimes just to give permission, right? So yes, it was frustrating when I would do something that had already been done, and I thought was such a great original idea. That was frustrating. But also then there were other things that were like, that I learned that someone else did that gave me permission to kind of, play around with things more than I might have. Or even recognize something was art that might not necessarily be. And for me, I think it was a conceptual art too, having something that, recognizing that it was art, what you're doing. So learning about conceptual art was a big thing for me too. And I think that's more because it was being open to what art was.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, and I think some of my favorite professors, they sort of gave art history. I mean, obviously there were the art history classes, but then a lot of artists, professors in the studio arts class, there was ways that they sort of integrated the art history or referenced what you were doing. Or some of the things I liked is when they would do it almost the opposite way. Like, hey, you're doing this just like this person, instead of it being you're just doing something that's already been done.
Yeah.
It was more like this person's doing interesting stuff and now you are too. So anyway, I'm for art history, absolutely. When we ask art history doesn't matter, I'm like, absolutely it does, and I enjoy it, and I think anyone that can take it should and can read books, should read books. But you don't need art history to be a great artist. You don't need to reference other people or be looking at other people in order to be a great artist. So one doesn't, in order to become a great artist, one must take all the art history and do that. It's not necessary, but to me, it's so much richer for me for having.
Yeah, the possibilities there. It can be, like you said, it can enrich whatever. And the two things that I want to kind of go from what things you said, and one was like, yeah, you can be insular. Like you can just be isolated because it's this form of expression. It's the same as like, maybe that's not the same. I mean, like, I was thinking of like being a writer, but I mean, I mean, you could just write your own thoughts and your natural style of what writing would be like, I think, without being too influenced directly by certain authors or something. Maybe that's a bad example, but I mean, art is way more versatile than writing. Art has so many different mediums and whatever else that you can make, if you're talking about visual art even by itself. But like, it can be this insular thing where you don't need other outside influences that come from the visual art world. If you're just expressing and that's all you're doing and your whatever natural way is to you, and I think of like graffiti and stuff because it was like a raw act that I wasn't even thinking of as art for a while, and then it became that for me. And I started with learning local history before I ever learned more about like, the decades of stuff that happened earlier and who was doing what and what graffiti, how that got started, and who was, like leading the charge with this and that, and the history of trains and stuff. That never even really interested me, even though graffiti completely overtook my mindset for sometimes for like months at a time. I couldn't wait until it was 2 a.m. so I can go writing.
But why didn't the history of that and learning about that interest you?
Because it wasn't acting. I wanted to go act. I wanted to go do. It just didn't like take a hold of me to be like, I want to learn about what other people did. I want to do. So even now, like, I mean, that's why it's taken me so long, even like, okay, I know the name Rothko in my head, and then it took me years to even look any paintings up. Because I'd rather go do. So like, even though I understood the value of researching and whatever, it was a forced scenario where I had to, and I appreciated it that one time. But it was very difficult for me to go and do formal research. Reading is a different thing.
Do you want me to make you do that more often?
I don't think you could make me do it.
I know I can make you do anything.
Like, even though I understand the value now, like, I read more than I did before, but it's in the same aspects that I used to. I read everything. And now I'm open to reading other things that may be more academic and getting things out of them. But it's hard for me to be like, I want to learn more about abstract expressionism today. I'm going to watch some videos. I'm going to read some articles. I'm going to do, like, to go down the rabbit hole like that, I don't. It's not natural for me to do. It's very few and far between that I ever do that. It's more of, it happens when I don't want to go to sleep. It's like, oh, I shouldn't be up right now. I should be asleep right now. That's when I'll do stuff like that sometimes. But yeah, I don't know. It just like even being fascinated with a genre or like an art movement or whatever, it wasn't fascinating enough for me to look into the other stuff. It just seemed boring. I just wanted to go and do stuff. Now I'm gonna try to remember the other thing that I was gonna go something about what you said, and it.
I think for me with art history, the constant of it maybe, like sort of just like painting, if you can do it, you know, with some regularity, if we don't have all the space in between, or we do have all the space in between, it's hard to kind of get in it again. And I think maybe with art history, it almost needs to be a practice of something that, you know, you're reading a little bit, and, you know, just like you're doing something else, like if we're in Venus, something, and it's something I should even do, not I should even do, but I'm saying like, I think it's something that would be valuable to all of a sudden like scan through and look at just a different artist. What I have been doing is looking at different artists and sort of how they painted, and then sometimes I try and emulate it. Usually that doesn't work, but it's just sort of trying, so that way for me, that's more about techniques and stuff, is what I've been looking at lately. But I don't know, it's like that grapefruit book by Yoko Ono.
Yeah.
Like there's lots of times I'll just read through their like 10 or 20 pages, because obviously it's one thing on each, but it's kind of inspiring. It's not an art history book, obviously, but it's an art book that, you know, is sort of inspiring. Or even if I don't do anything that is related to that, just sort of something else that someone else was out there thinking about and doing. So I don't know. I think, well, I've already said it, that I think art history is very influential, really important. Probably will be an art history book soon. So. But it's not just about process, right? I mean, it's not just about how people are doing things, but it's why they're doing things, and, you know, the different movements, and even the Dada movement that you were talking about, or all those different movements. And sometimes I'm so jealous that those things happened and I wasn't there then. But I mean, in those movements for writers, and just sort of how people push things and thought about things and did things. And so that's where I guess I sort of said they almost gave me permission to be able to do this or that or something else. So it's, I don't know, just opening things up for knowledge that aren't necessarily about how people did stuff, but why. And I think that can be really inspiring.
I think the permission thing was something I wanted to go back to, so I'm glad you said that again, because that's the one I forgot. That's what didn't come natural to me, and with friends, the more that I do art, the more I come across this thing. And I'm glad I understand it now. Like, I needed to understand it, and I understood it before I started teaching, because there was somebody that I'll talk about in a second. But the permission thing, I didn't think of it. Art history never gave me permission to do anything, because before I thought about art, I guess there's two things that I can point to. And before I get into the graffiti example again, before that, the first visual art piece I made on my own time that was not just like kid coloring or like, oh, I made a dinosaur with pencil crayon and sent it to, like, well, I'm thinking of a very specific example. but I sent it to like one of my babysitters who was serving a mission somewhere or whatever. I was like, oh, send Todd a letter, and then whatever. But I mean, when I was in my teens, like, I was taking art, and I didn't do, like, it was uninteresting, it was boring, it was not engaging, etc., that I've talked about before. But I had a book. I was writing all the time, and I had this hardcover sketchbook that I did my writing in, and I altered this book to a point where, like, I didn't think of it as visual art at the time, but later on I was like, man, this is the first visual art piece I've ever made on my own. I remember I had this crappy cream spray paint color. I colored it with that. I started ripping the cover up, so it had like these like steps and layers of the cardboard, and these chunks taken out of it. I like started lighting this pen on fire, and the ink was coming out of it, and these droplets of fire, and I had wax on it, and I had like black ink all over, like, and it was like this. It was basically an abstract painting that I would have done later with just like a couple color cream, black, and red. Which later on, when I started making abstracts, that my color palette was white, scarlet, and black. And so I did all that stuff to this book, and I was like, man, I was like looking at it. That was something that came natural to me. It was not traditional in the sense of, I'm going to draw a portrait, or a landscape, or, it just wasn't a traditional piece of art in the way that was introduced to me in school, and I didn't see it as art at the time. But that's something that a lot of people don't even think they can do, is like break stuff. And that came very natural to me, before, like wrecking this thing was making it like art for me. And then later with graffiti, that was the thing. I didn't have permission to go do that. I didn't think of it as art at the time either, but like, I didn't have the permission to go do it, and I did it anyway.
By permission, I don't mean that by permission though, when I say permission to do things.
I think I know what you mean, but that's,
okay.
I think I'm getting there, and that's
okay.
The thing is that like, but my whole thing of not, it just stems from like, I didn't think there were rules. I didn't think that like, there were things that I didn't know about, like conceptual art as like I didn't even understand that was the thing, but I never thought like, okay, when you say permission, what it reminds me of is, this is what art is. I didn't have that structure. My high school teacher tried to give us that structure, but it was so limited and boring and small that I couldn't even pay attention. So I didn't grow up thinking, oh, this is what art is. It was just, I just did stuff, and then later on I was like, man, that was art. This is art. This thing I'm doing right now is art. That thing over there is art. I didn't have a rigid thing. And I think some people don't have that because they've been exposed to the fact art can be everything. But some people do have a very specific idea of what art is. And
for me, I guess permission was, the easiest thing I can think of right now is my art project over the last year and a half or whatever, that is photographing my nude body. Mm-hmm. So that would have been something that I did have a natural idea of using my body, and I didn't quite figure out what the context was, not just this year and a half, like ages ago. Yeah. And it was when I started learning about feminist art, activist art, that kind of thing, that I was able, so maybe permission isn't the right word, but to put in a context and to recognize what I was doing and why it was important. And it's not just that I was trying to put this, I knew that it wasn't just because I was trying to put nude photos of me out there. I knew that wasn't what I was doing, but I wasn't really able to put it into sort of a formal context or be able to talk about it. And so for me, when I say permission, it's more, oh, okay, that's how it fits in. And if I didn't have that art history foundation, then I'm not sure. I'm not sure where I would have gone with it or how I would have gone with it. I had enough. I knew I was right, and I knew what I was making was art, but I wasn't, and I wasn't self-conscious about it or anything. But once I learned about it, then I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what's going on. Okay, so that's where I'm talking more about permission, is how what I was doing fit into a bigger context of what also was being done in the feminist movement, the activist movement, just art itself and what was going in there. So that's what I mean about permission for me, is, and it's maybe permission isn't the right word, but a way to put context into what I was doing. Yeah. And it's something that otherwise, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's what I have to say about that. So that's what I mean by permission.
I think it comes from a really academic place, because like my whole thing was like, the context to me didn't matter. I'm doing what I'm doing, and that's enough. And it was just like, it's like saying I declare this art, so F everything else. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. There doesn't have to be a context. I'm the context. Mm-hmm. And I say, this is it, so this is it. And the context, I think, can enrich stuff for sure, like it did with my BFA exhibition. If I didn't have the context of Pollock and what Clement Greenberg said about Pollock, then my BFA show would have been a lot different. I don't know how I would have written the statement for it, like the artist statement for the show. So that context definitely enriched me and my practice and that specific exhibition and each work in that exhibition. But to me, it feels like so academic to like be like, well, this context is there, and that's not always a bad thing. It's just that I think some people hold on to that so much that sometimes they get stuck, and sometimes it helps. Like when you're saying it like helped you understand that there was a context and there was more. Like you said, you saw how you fit in, and at first I was like, well, why do you need to fit in? And then I understood like, if you're like, oh, this is where like, I don't know, I'm visually seeing like a timeline or something, and being like, oh, this is where it is, and this happened before, and this is what's happening. Like, I guess I wouldn't say after, but like on a spectrum of like things that happen, and then it's like, oh, I can see where other people did what, and now I understand that this is how I can play off of those things too, and I can take those. That's how I'm.
Well, yeah, and it's also that, I mean, it could come across as very narcissistic, just taking pictures of yourself, right? That could come across that way, so it's almost, I guess, by permission, it's going, no, it's not. Like, I knew it wasn't, but it's just, so it's not even how I fit into it. It's that permission thing, I guess. It's like learning more about the movement, learning more about what's going on with body and age and invisibility and all those different things.
Yeah.
And so knowing, like I knew in the back of my mind, those are the things that were going on, but I couldn't really quite, I don't know. I guess that when I read that, I was like, oh yeah, like that's what's going on. That's where it's coming from. So it's not even necessarily that I fit into a certain spot. It was like someone else helped explain me, I guess. And I felt better about that. And maybe, well, I think it does probably come from a really academic spot, but it helped make me feel more secure in what I was doing, I guess. Because, yeah, I don't know.
Well, and this is, I think rather than going to the originality aspect of things, that could probably be its own podcast, but I think I just came to a place where I realized, like, yeah, the art history or structured learning about anything, but talking about art, yeah, it can enhance, it can also be really detrimental. Mm-hmm. And that obviously depends on your teacher for one thing, or your instructor, or whatever. But if you don't have any of that, it can be just as detrimental, I think, like, or just as amazing, because I didn't have it for a long time, and then when I did have it, it was a detriment into the fact that I could have started. This is going to sound really vain, but if I had an art teacher like me, I maybe could have started actually doing work 10 years earlier than I was doing it. Because I would have been like, oh, this is art? Cool. I like art, and I'm going to do art now. I just did art in high school from grade 7 to 12 because there was a lack of options. And I wasn't engaged, and I didn't care. But, like, there's someone that was...
So when you were in high school art, did they give you any art history? Or what's high school art like? Like, do they give you any art history?
It depends on the teacher.
Well, when you took your high school art, did they give you any art history? Or was it like, draw this?
We did a still life every single day. I remember doing grid portraits for one unit. I remember that there was some art history, but it was more, like, the onus was on us, which was like, that's why I said, like, having to do this presentation was a very high school thing. So it was like, okay, here's a list of artists. Dali did surrealism. This is what surrealism is, a quick overview. You do the research, write a report, present it to us. It wasn't like, she wasn't showing us slides and explaining, hey, this is public art, this is what this is, let's have a discussion, let's have a conversation. That never happened. Mm-hmm. There was no conversation, there was no discussion, there was hardly any presenting of knowledge even. It was just like, yeah, this is like surrealism, and there's also this other thing called, we didn't get into anything cool like postmodernism or public art or, well, I say cool, but the things I'm interested in, and then coincidentally we didn't touch on any of those things. There just wasn't a very full picture. It was just old and boring and static, and like, I appreciate a still life now more than I did then, but it's technical and it doesn't really have to mean anything, and it could, but like, it was just so, yeah, static and boring and not engaging. But what I was going to say is, like, there's someone that I met in my, like, late 20s, mid-20s, who is the same age as me, and they really enjoyed the idea of art, and then they're like, what do I do? Like, they wanted to do some painting and stuff. They're like, what do I do? I'm like, what do you mean? Just do. And I never really encountered that before because I wasn't teaching yet. I didn't even do my internship yet. But I was just like, what? Like, I just didn't...
Well, I did that to you with painting. When we first went to painting, I was like,
I know,
what
but
do I do?
that's...
And you were like, just paint on.
Yeah, but that's exactly the thing. Is that, like, there's this cartoon, and maybe I'll insert it here at the end or something if I can find it quickly. But, like, there's just this cartoon of somebody sitting there with a blank piece... Or I don't even think they have a piece of paper. Like, I want to do art, but I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to get started. And then someone just, like, comes in and gives them a blank piece of paper and shoves a pencil in their hand, and they, like, force their head down to look at, like, what they're just like, huh, and there it is. And then the person's like, oh, okay. Like, it's just this thing of, like, you just do it. Like, there's no... Stop thinking so much.
Yeah.
Which goes to this Finding Forrester bit thing in my head, too. But, like, it's... Yeah. I just didn't understand the fact that you couldn't just do something. Just, what do you mean, what do you do? Like, and that kind of leads to, like, well, if you have nothing to express, why are you trying to express anything, I guess? But that concept, like, reoccurred, not just with you, because I started teaching before I met you, but it was just like, well, I didn't really start, well, my internship was before that, but I mean, in earnest, like, teaching art, sometimes people would get stuck, and I'm just like, you just do something. Like, you just have to do, and, like, talking about process, and the whole Chuck Close thing, and not having inspiration, or whatever, it was just, like, it was just really, I don't know about shocking, but I mean, the whole thing, it just came back to my mind when you said permission, and there's so many students that's why I started, like, okay, what is art? Like, in my internship, that's the first unit, is what is art?
Yeah.
Because I want to know, what is art to you? And so much of it was this generic, traditional bullcrap that I was just like, okay, there's a lot of work to be done here, and I know that now. And we need to deconstruct your ideas of what you think. Like, that's why we start with, like, how do you define art? Give me, like, some jot notes, whatever, and then at the end of the semester, give me a sentence. Because it's like, you need to start thinking about what art is, and I'm going to open your minds a little bit as to what it could be, and maybe yours will go further than mine ever was, and you're like, no, this is art. I'm like, what the heck? But it just needed to be opened up, because I found that it was so rigid. Like, because of everything that they've been told up to that point, that they're just like, oh, art is drawing and painting. Like, art is, you know, it was never like, conceptual art isn't on their radar at all. You know, public art wasn't on their radar at all. Like, so many things, performance art wasn't even there. Like, thinking about music as art, thinking about movies as art, about dance as art, like, it's just, anyway. And that's where I feel like it's art history or learning about art or whatever you want to call it. Without having that foundation, you could go either way, possibly. You get influenced by other factors where you realize you don't, like, you have all these limitations maybe, and at the same time, maybe you go the other way and you don't have any limitations at all because you've never learned that there are limitations. And then again, if you are taught, maybe someone's really crappy at teaching and they teach you, this is what art is, and, you know, it's like someone saying, rap isn't music, like, so this isn't fit into music, and someone says that with art stuff too, like, graffiti's not art. Like, if someone says that and you believe that growing up your whole life, yeah. Anyway, I'm really ranting now. But that's what the whole permission thing took me as to, like, why art history, yes, it can be important, but I mean, also, it can be easily ignored, and sometimes it's detrimental depending on how you absorb that information.
Yeah, it can be detrimental because if you, you could take it where it almost paralyzes you because you'll never be as good as what somebody else is, or you believe that.
Well, I was just thinking if someone feeds you the wrong art history.
Yeah, can I have some pure water? Thanks. Like, you mean gives you something it doesn't apply to what the work you're doing, or?
You need to click from the top.
That, where?
Yeah.
Where?
Yeah. It's okay.
I don't use water bottles very often.
No, I mean, like, if someone feeds you art history in a way that they're not showing you artists who have pushed boundaries, for instance.
Yeah.
Like, if they're not showing you things that would lead to that whole permission thing, or, like, how I was interpreting that. But, I mean, if they're just showing you, like, oh, well, this is art, figure drawings, and I love figure drawings, you know, but I mean, if someone's just showing you very traditional stuff that doesn't push boundaries, that may have pushed boundaries back then, but then became accepted, and no one's showing you, like, and maybe that's what I love so much about postmodernism. Like, we're gonna dive into the more Orlan and that kind of thing later.
We'll have to do a podcast about postmodernism.
That would be tight, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I have to brush up.
Me too.
But yeah, there's just the fact that, the rules, let's just throw those in the trash. Like, traditionalism for traditionalism's sake, or tradition for tradition's sake, is garbage to me and always has been. But that's the thing, some people get fed the wrong type of art history, or they get fed art history in just the wrong way. And it's not about challenging, it's not about being open, it's not about discussion, it's about, hey, this is what it is, and you're going to fit into this box. That's where it can be really bad. Art history in and of itself doesn't do that. It's how somebody gives you the information, introduces you to the concepts, and how you absorb those concepts.
I guess as you're talking about postmodernism, I'm thinking of Eva Hesse, and she was someone who was really inspirational to me as well, and maybe is on that permission thing. And maybe I just didn't have, I just didn't experiment with that kind of art when I was doing art, because I didn't take art all through high school. My mom drew very well, and I thought that's what an artist was, and I knew I couldn't do that. Yeah. And so I never took art. I didn't take it till university because someone said you should take it. So I just assumed that in order to be an artist, you have to be able to draw really well. And so maybe when I talk about permission, it's as I got into art, like especially, of course, in foundations, then you kind of like tear it all apart, right? As to what is art and how you make art. And Eva Hesse would just use, she would use like latex, and she would just like hang stuff, and there'd be like just all kinds of stuff that didn't seem like art. She didn't care about the things that she was doing. Everyone was like, latex, like how's that gonna last? And she'd be like, I don't really care, like this is what I'm doing right now. And so she did whatever she wanted, she used whatever material she wanted, and it was very much again about the process of what she was doing. And so sort of that, I don't really care what everyone thinks, right? Like this is what I'm making. And so again, that was what I call permission, and maybe it's the wrong word that I'm using. No,
I think that's, what you're saying now is what I was getting from what you were saying earlier.
Okay.
I keep going back to the student thing, but it's amusing to me, and also just like, it's still, even though I know it's going to happen every time, sometimes students ask me, can I do this? I'm like, yeah? What are you asking me for? Yeah, you can mix mediums. Like, sometimes it's really simple things like, well, can I use acrylic and ink? Yeah, you can do whatever you want. And once I introduce the concept of destruction, some people get really excited about it, and some people are like, well, can I break glass and put it on there? I'm like, dude, you can do whatever you want. Like, do you not understand? Like, you can do anything. Like, you can burn this, you can throw it against a wall, you can break it, you can add sand, you can add, like, coffee grounds. I don't care if you put a ham sandwich on there. Like, but that's the thing, is, like, it still baffles me, just because I wasn't ever that way of, like, well, could I... Like, I don't know, they get like coy and shy, and like, well, can I try this? Yeah, you could do that. Please do. Like, it gets me excited when people start doing it, and it's weird when people ask about it. But like I said, it's funny, and like, it's a good feeling that people are actually doing it. But that's the thing, is like you said, when someone showed you that this is what it could be, so it excites me to be that person to be able to show people that. Yeah. But like, and then that's the thing about the permission thing, and that's if I'm only showing them certain things of our history, they're not going to ask those questions. They're not going to think that they could do those things. Yeah. And there's a responsibility with that too, because then it sometimes goes off the rails. And I've had two people that have told me, and I've seen the evidence of their work on the street, and like. And that came just from talking about public art and like talking about graffiti and whatever, and maybe they would have done that regardless. But I mean, there was one person who was like, hey, my assignment is over at this address. And I was like, oh, I was like, no, please, like that's not what, anyway. But yeah, I don't know. It's, like I said, there's responsibility in that in all sorts of ways. If you're an educator, or you're just what's the word? A patron, or if you're just sharing art with a kid or something, that I think that, there's, like with anything, you could be just being aware that this is this is open and this is like that there's no rules really in a good way.
Yeah.
And I don't know, yeah, like you said, because of how you came across that process, like that you said it wasn't until that foundations class that you started, like you said, they tore it all apart and this is what art is and what isn't. And but before then
I always did arty things or crafty things, or just had a sensibility about me that was artistic, that everyone would say that. But it wasn't till my first or second year of university, it was Carrie Luther actually, who said, I just took a foundations class, and like, you should take it. It was really good. I was like, oh, and it did sound good, so I took it, and then I was like, oh, here are my people.
Yeah.
Like, this is where I should have been all along. I was doing an English degree, really close to ending an English degree actually. If I was smart, I would have, but I was so enamored with art that I was like, I'm switching majors. I'm getting a BFA. I think that, and I had Mary Kavanaugh and Michael Campbell. Both of them are really great and different artists, and have different teaching styles and that kind of thing. And both were really open, and then really changed things up. Like, you know, I don't know, I guess like when you're a newbie and you're taking art, you know, you're doing different things. And I remember putting something on a pedestal. Michael Campbell's like, why are you doing that? I'm like, well, just so it, like, I don't know, looks good. We don't need that. Like, just sort of, they would just kind of like rip away things. Like, why are you doing that? Why does something need to be on a pedestal in order to look important?
Yeah.
And, you know, sort of like ripping away all these ideas that I had learned from the little bit of art that I knew, right? Like the art that you think you know before you learn some art history, right? What gives it importance, what doesn't, and that kind of thing. And so that class just really helped me understand that absolutely I was an artist, and absolutely that I had something to say. And then even more than give me skills, it did give me skills for sure, but more than that, it just opened up as to what was art and what I could think about doing and not doing, and that kind of thing. So,
I think that's the thing that's most important, is the skill of unlearning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that only happens kind of once. I think there's like a key moment maybe, and then after that, you start asking yourself why. You don't need someone else to ask you why, right?
If you don't get to the point where you're asking yourself why, then it's like,
what are you
trouble.
doing?
Yeah.
But, and I just had a thing while you were talking, and I think that one of the biggest things that art did, and now we're beyond art history and just talking about learning art and art education, but it's the language. Because while you were talking about, like, I was doing crafty things, whatever, and I was thinking, like, I wonder what you were dressed like. Because fashion is such a, like,
always,
you know, and then that's the thing, I was like, you were probably walking around very, like, colors, compositions, like, certain cuts of things, like, and I never thought of that. In high school, I dressed a certain way with certain color palettes, I was very aware of it, never thought of it as art, whatever. But I was just thinking, like, I have the language. What does the word composition mean? I didn't know that as a kid. So, like, art history and art education or whatever gave me the language, which in turn helps me produce things in a certain way, or to talk about things to help other people learn, to help other people understand why I do what I do. Like, that language is somewhat important too. Like, knowing why I'm doing what I'm doing, and like, being able to give something a label sometimes. Because like, oh, why does that photograph look good? Sometimes I can't pinpoint why the composition looks good, but sometimes I can. I go, oh, there's all this like negative space, and there's like these things in the foreground, and like I throw the rule of thirds out the window, I think. But I mean, there's these different things that you have a language that you can.
What's funny, I remember in foundations, one of the things we had to draw, I think, branches. We had to do 9 of them, and they had to be like maybe 7 by 7s. I don't know, these little squares, and you had to draw different branches. It was one of the drawing things, and so I drew these and then put them all up there. And Mary Kavanaugh like uses it like, do you see how this is composed and blah blah blah. And so she shows me I have all the branches that are all sort of going in the same way, like they fill it. And I had no idea I'd done that until she pointed it out. Like, so it is sort of this, when people say you're artistic or something, I think it is a way of seeing things, because I didn't consciously do that. But obviously it was something that you have an idea of how things should look, or you know things should be composed certain ways. And before I had the language, or even the awareness to notice that, right?
Yeah.
And so then once I was taking some art and learning art, just you sort of learn why you're doing things too.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I no, that's good. And once you learn why maybe if you didn't have enough knowledge to understand what you were doing, and then you do,
Yeah.
again, then you just carry that forward with everything.
Right, and challenge it and push it and
Exactly.
all of those things.
Yeah.
And grow on it, right? Yeah. And that's where I think art history can be good, because it helps us to grow on things. And so, yes, you can read about how someone started this, but how are you going to fuck with it now? Like, how are you going to, like, push it and make it better, or just different, or it's your voice instead of their voice, and that in itself is different.
Yeah.
You know? So, yeah. What do you think?
I don't know. I feel like I learned more about this conversation than I thought I was going to.
Yeah, me
for
too.
sure. Yeah, that went really well for me. Like, I'm saying what I got out of it.
Yeah.
Hopefully other people got something out of it too.
Yeah. All right.
Is that our artist life?
That is our artist life.